as we Africans continue to celebrate the new breed of African leaders emerging in our Francophone countries such as Senegal, Niger, Burkina Faso, and Mali, some questions still linger in our minds about how France was able to steal the natural resources in these countries with such ease and for so long. In order to understand just how much these resources mean to France, let us remember, viewers, that former French President Jacques Chirac in 2008 stated that without Africa, France will be relegated to the rank of 23rd power. An even deeper truth about the importance of Africa to France was revealed by another former president, François Mitterrand, in 1957. He declared boldly that without Africa, France would have no history in the 21st century. But the key question is this, viewers. How was France able to brainwash most African presidents in Francophone Africa into allowing the widespread looting of their country's wealth long after other colonial powers had left the continent? Furthermore, why is it that most Francophone African presidents had been so obsessed with France, with the French language, with French culture, with French food and wine, and with the supposed French refinement and superiority over other cultures? Indeed, many of them chose to live for extended periods in France, with some even retiring permanently to their chateaux and extravagant apartments in Paris. The prestige that Francophone elites gained back home after living in France is discussed in the famous book Black Skin, White Mask by Frantz Fanon, the Black psychiatrist and political philosopher from the French overseas territory of Martinique, who stated that the Negro who knows the mother country is a demigod. Many of them, after stays of varying length in metropolitan France, go home to be deified. The black man who has lived in France for a length of time returns radically changed. To express it in genetic terms, his phenotype undergoes a definite and absolute mutation. And why is it these same African presidents have been so ashamed of their African identity, their African culture, their African black skin, and their fellow African people, to the extent that most Francophone presidents who led their countries after independence married white or biracial women with French roots? Here again, Frantz Fanon, the black psychiatrist and political philosopher, analyzes this psychopathology as follows. Every colonized people, in other words, every people in whose soul an inferiority complex has been created by the death and burial of its local cultural originality, finds itself face to face with the language of the civilizing nation, that is, with the culture of the mother country. The colonized is elevated above his jungle status in proportion to his adoption of the other country's cultural standards. He becomes whiter as he renounces his blackness, his jungle. In this video, viewers, you will learn how France quite deliberately developed psychological strategies for controlling the minds of African politicians and other elites by literally replacing their African identity with a pseudo-French identity, and how this process led to a crippling inferiority complex in Francophone Africa. The hidden agenda, though, for creating this African inferiority complex was this: to create a class of African leaders who would blindly and obediently allow the wanton looting of their country's wealth in exchange for their acceptance by the French as equals. But, of course, this acceptance never materialized because, as it is widely known the world over, France today is one of the most racist countries in the world. But before I delve deeper into explaining how this brainwashing of Africans was done, let me remind you viewers to support my work by liking and subscribing to this channel. When you do so, you are helping me to continue providing you with these types of well-researched and detailed videos about Africa. Now, back to the strategies of psychological manipulation used to make African leaders feel inferior to their French colonial masters. This devious mind control game, meant to serve a clear political agenda, became an official policy known as assimilation. Assimilation was the ideological basis of French colonial policy in the 19th century and 20th century. In sharp contrast to British imperial policy, the French taught her subjects that by adopting French language and culture, they could eventually become French. The assimilation policy was first established in the four communes of Gorée, Dakar, Rufisque, and Saint-Louis in Senegal, due to the country's status as the oldest French colony in Africa. Africans here were in theory afforded all the rights of French citizens. Interestingly, the key legal requirements for the Senegalese to be granted French citizenship in their own countries, apart from mastery of the French language, were loyalty to France, not their own country, and a career in the French civil service for a minimum of 10 years. In other words, the black French citizens were expected to be mere cogs in the wheel of the French government, the type who simply obeyed orders from the French master. You see, to the French, Africans had no history, no sense of identity, and needed to be saved. The entirety of knowledge systems that governed the social, economic, political, and cultural relations of Africans was non-existent to the colonial master. They had come with the quote-unquote finest civilization that brought enlightenment, a dark continent of savagery. Through education, commerce, and Christianity. The key incentive for the Africans who were willing to renounce their legal protection was that they became elevated to the prestigious status of évolué, meaning evolved or civilized by the standards of the French. In exchange, they were nominally granted full French citizenship, including the right to vote. Despite these political rights, however, the évolué still faced widespread racial discrimination in Africa as well as in France. The assimilation policy was also a divide and rule policy that pitted the emerging African evaluate class against the non-evaluate masses. But at its core, the policy aimed to brainwash African elites in order to have full control of them and their resources. Today, the psychological, economic, and socio-cultural consequences of this policy have been devastating for Francophone Africa because most of the heads of state in these countries have been serving French interests at the expense of their African citizens. A prime example of a Francophone leader who became a stooge of the French was Houphouët-Boigny of Ivory Coast, which he later changed to the French name of Côte d'Ivoire. During the 1959 referendum organized by the French government for the French African colonies between gaining independence or joining the neo-colonial Francophone African community, Boigny said this: "Whatever happens, Côte d'Ivoire will enter directly to the Franco-African community. The other territories are free to group themselves before joining." Even more astonishing is the fact that the Ivorian president opposed the emerging quest for African unity by Pan-Africanists like Kwame Nkrumah. On 7 April 1957, Kwame Nkrumah, who was on a visit to Ivory Coast, called all colonies in Africa to declare independence. Houphouët-Boigny expressed his strong opposition by stating that your experience is rather impressive, but due to the human relationships between the French and Africans, and because in the 20th century people have become independent, we consider that it would perhaps be more interesting to try a new and different experience than yours, and unique in itself, one of a Franco-African community based on equality and fraternity. Never mind that Francophone Africans have never been accorded any equality or fraternity by the French. Yet another brainwashed African leader was Gabon's first president, Léon Mba, who openly campaigned for Gabon to become a French overseas territory instead of gaining independence. Even more shocking was his intention to design the new Gabonese flag by incorporating the French national flag as a sign that Gabon was still a French territory. Luckily for Gabon, Mba's initiative was stopped by some patriotic Gabonese. This imperialist conquest of African leaders served French colonial interests well. For the colonized to voluntarily submit to this dehumanizing system of oppression and exploitation, they had to be defeated mentally, ideologically, and spiritually. And this persists to this day. The Africans viewed Eurocentric education and religion as the only avenues towards material success. The aim was to strive to become like the rational, elite white man. But it soon became apparent that no matter how much Africans attempted to construct their being in the mold of the European, they were never accepted as European. There were still Black Africans who were incapable of thinking for themselves and had perennially hunt for the colonizers' validation. As such, Africans could only express their humanity only if it aligned with colonial interests, and it was approved by the colonial. In this, the inferiority complex that Africans still wrestle with today was concretely entrenched in the collective psyche of the colonial. Given all this psychopathology, what is the way forward for Africans? The way forward is for Africans to develop indigenous narratives that challenge these knowledge hierarchies as dictated from the Western Gate. Education as it stands today in Francophone Africa and Africa as a whole serves to produce a passive citizenry that conforms to a Eurocentric world in which Africa's knowledge systems are continually killed while the plunder and theft of natural resources persist unabated. There is thus the need to fight neo-colonial domination and stranglehold of a knowledge production system that still render Africa a subhumans in need of saving. Africans need to realize the power of their being and the totality of their cultural history. Inferiority complexes keep us shackled to capitalist modern-day slavery. But the more we claim our indigenous oral tradition and wisdom, our spirituality, and our sense of humanistic communitarianism, the more we will edge closer to the reality of our decolonization and holistic independence. This mental decolonization is perhaps Africa's final war of it, and it is the war whose time has come. And that's it, viewers. Hope you enjoyed this video. Don't forget to like and subscribe for more of this thought-provoking content. Till next time.